Wow-wee. And all those stars, if you look out in the sky, is a firework display like you see on the 4th of July, which is a great occasion for celebration. The universe is a celebration. This is a fireworks show to celebrate that existence is. Wow-wee. And then they say, but however, you can't, there's no point just in sustaining bliss. Let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time. Or any length of time you wanted to have. And you would, naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. You would have every kind of pleasure you could conceive. And after several nights of 75 years of total pleasure each, you would say, well, that was pretty great. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Where something is going to happen to me that I don't know what it's going to be. And you would dig that and come out of that and say, wow, that was a close shave, wasn't it? And then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. And finally, you would dream where you are now. You would dream the dream of living the life that you are actually living today. That would be within the infinite multiplicity of choices you would have, of playing that you weren't God. Because the whole nature of the Godhead, according to this idea, is to play that he's not. The first thing he says to himself is, man, get lost. Because he gives himself away. The nature of love is self-abandonment, not clinging to oneself. Throwing yourself out, as in, for example, in basketball, you're always getting rid of the ball. You say to the other fellow, have a ball. See? And that keeps things moving. That's the nature of life. So in this idea, then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality. Not God in a politically kingly sense, but God in the sense of being the self, the deep down basic whatever there is. And you're all that, only you're pretending you're not. And it's perfectly okay to pretend you're not. Come off it. Shiva, I recognize you. When you come to my door and you say, I'm so-and-so, I say, ha ha, what a funny way God has come on today. So that eventually, there are all sorts of tricks, of course, that gurus play. They say, well, we're going to put you through the mill. And the reason they do that is simply that you won't wake up until you feel you've paid a price for it. In other words, the sense of guilt that one has, or the sense of anxiety, is simply the way one experiences keeping the game of disguise going on. You see that? Supposing you say, I feel guilty. Christianity makes you feel guilty for existing. That somehow, the very fact that you exist is an affront. You are a fallen human being. I remember as a child when we went to the services of the church on Good Friday, they gave us each a colored postcard with Jesus crucified on it. And it said underneath, "This have I done for thee. What doest thou for me?" You know, you felt awful. You nailed that man to the cross. Because you eat steak, you have crucified Christ. Because you killed the bull. After all, you depend on it. Mithra. It's the same mystery. And what are you going to do about that? This have I done for thee. What doest thou for me? You feel awful that you just exist at all. But that sense of guilt is the veil across the sanctuary. Don't you dare come in. In order to, you know, in all mysteries, when you're going to be initiated, with somebody saying, don't you come in. You've got to fulfill this requirement, this requirement, this requirement, this requirement. Then we'll let you in. And so you go through the mill. Why? Because this is, you're saying to yourself, I won't wake up until I feel I deserve it. I won't wake up until I've made it difficult for me to wake up. So I invent for myself an elaborate system of delaying my waking up. I put myself through this test and that test, and when I feel it's been sufficiently arduous, then I may at last admit to myself who I really am and draw aside the veil and realize that after all, when all is said and done, I am that I am, which is the name of God. And when it comes to it, that's really rather funny. They say in Zen, when you attain Satori, nothing is left to you at that moment but to have a good laugh. But naturally, all masters, Zen masters, yoga masters, every kind of master, puts up a barrier and says to you, listen.
This is work in progress for my second commentary piece. I'm experimenting with the script. It theoretically contains video format elements, but I'm simply going to describe those elements using narration, similar to when Alan Watts does the piece "Every Mystic Has Seen the Light" at the end of the Zen Bones talk. So I can simply narrate what the experience of the video would feel like as a stylistic element of my format. Title: You Need a Rectangle. Segment 1. What the F even is this? Greetings, adventure students and fellow fools. I am Fool the Great, the menacing friend. Welcome to my adventure. Title card appears, and it's the 2-bracket rectangle symbol. Originally may have represented a door, the doors of Stanley's office, etc. My adventure, as a matter of fact, is a rectangle called the Zen Paradox, and I'm here to tell you about it. Now, it began as a mystery. At first, I only knew what it was. I knew what it was called, specifically. The Zen Paradox. That's all I knew. I also knew it was the final page in my story, that I had arrived. The final page, turns out, is what adventure school is. Education. What education is. Every page is a first page. They're all first. They're all center points. Any point on the sphere is the center point of the surface of the sphere. I've done a lot of what I call leaping. First modeled to me in true Zen Paradox fashion by Super Mario Brothers. Mario boing a few seconds with the audio pops up or leaps up at us from the stream frame view. The first session of this went into a little bit of detail about it, describing the vehicle of adventure basics and the battle shout, reconciled with Zen and the question about what skill is, despite the fact that it is impossible to improve yourself. Well, my first page is a funny tale of a kid, seemingly immune to brainwashing systems he was born into. I was a little kid, the giggler in church. I was just too much for the social systems that attempted to educate me. I didn't know that I knew. I only knew that I knew it. I didn't know what it was that I knew. I was always in trouble with the church, the school, or the law. Couldn't help it. I didn't want what they were offering. I wanted to celebrate. I did not know that I knew. I didn't know what I knew, just that I knew it. At that moment that I began to really look into the rectangle of Alan Watts' mythos education, suddenly I became an educator of mythos and adventure. I beheld me, becoming the I that knows me, when I know that I know that I know. Because you see, I beheld both sides, all 10 directions, to use a Zen vehicle. The rectangle, 4 edges on it, plus up and down, the direction you go when you leap, and the front and back of this thing, both sides, my side and Alan's side. That's what is cool about this rectangle. Unlike a mirror, this thing gives you all 10 directions when you look in, not just your own image bouncing back. You can see everything when you look through. It was nonsensical when it first struck me. Sentences danced in my head, such as, the Zen Paradox unties every problem you pass through it. I had dreams involving it as a primary social experience, weird mood set pieces involving human contact, but I didn't know what it was at all, yet. But I kept looking. I haven't looked away from it yet. I've done a lot of leaping, a flip from the center, the unspeakable moment that cannot be effed, up to the very top, the edge of where you're conscious. Here, you see the interpolation of the motion. It's moving so fast that it now appears still. It's paused here, the place where you can feel the eternal sensation. Thanks to the pause, rectangle, reality can now, in fact, be effed. Rectangle. At the edge of where you're conscious, there is a beautiful view from high up and far. I've come to understand this as the basic dance of the mystic, who has literally fallen out of the matrix because ideology cannot hold him in the chaos, the stress, the worrying, which is the middle stuff. It's everything above the center point before you reach the edge. This is where the unawakened person, the non-Buddha, spends their time, worrying and panicking for survival, completely unaware that they're already there. There's nothing to attain and nowhere else to go. They are also flipping, but it's not a leap. It's just tumbling around chaotically in anxiety. Well, cut to Mario. The sound of Mario getting burned in Mario 64, mixed with visuals of him being tumbled crazily in space, perhaps from something like Super Mario Galaxy. The perpetual moment, it began when I first looked, and here it continues still. When I stared into the Zen paradox, it stared back, and gradually, I absorbed the next detail. We are in the mind. End of segment 1. Segment 2, title preview. I convey every brick I am made out of. Now, this section of Adventure School is about 2 themes: darkness, demise, decay, terror, all the elements of the bad trip mythos. All the elements of pretty much every adventure game that involves battling some kind of evil or contains some kind of nightmare presence. And the second theme is another theme that appears in games, which is secret areas, out of bounds, the mythos of escaping the boundaries, or as I call it now, accessing the scaffolding, the parts you wouldn't normally see while going through your path. This section is an off-the-cusp draft. I have written this out in various posts, but I'm now stringing them together into a new narration stream during this draft. I'm not reading this off the screen anymore. I'm reading it out of my head. So, I think the most powerful image or rectangle that video games offers us is in fact the concept of escaping the boundaries or secret areas. And this element first appeared for me to a certain extent, Super Mario Bros. 1, because you're able to find secret areas and clip through the geometry in that game in a couple different ways that were clearly, some were intended and some were not intended by the maker. So in some of them you're seeing intentional scaffolding where they made it and then made other paths for you to take to get between it. But really the first out-of-bounds experience that I have in games is in the game Doom, which there's a corollary to escaping the boundary that I want to talk about here in this second segment of this particular episode, which is the concept of mind open spaces. So escaping the boundaries can't exist without there being a boundary, without there being something that's the main road, the path that was built for you to go through normally. There's no escaping the boundary except if there's some normal way that is clearly the intended way for you to go. Now that intended way can't get built without some kind of a scaffolding. The image is the directions of up and down. You can't get up unless there's something to stand on to build the next thing, taking you to the next degree of upness, essentially. Unless you're leaping. So, when we're describing world building or world traversing, what we're talking about here is the concept of an intended path, which is basically a path that someone else has built. Any path. It's intended because it's built. It's built because they intended it. That's why it became built, because it's the physical, geometrical world manifestation of somebody's intent in adventuring. So, mind open spaces is maybe the first concept conveying this sensation that we are in the mind. Why are people so obsessed with noise-polluting noises in the fucking downtime days in this world? This is literally I went all the way away from the first corner where I encountered it to get away from the first noise. And here's the second machine noise creator. So, mind open spaces represents there's two paces that you can take in adventuring. You can wander, you can go gradually, kind of absorbing and drinking in the details of relative stillness of the location where you are in that moment. And alternatively, the upper limit from that is you can zoom around. You can traverse across the whole area that's available up to the boundary to where you can no longer go any further. Back and forth. You can run around. If you give a little kid a big open room, you see the second one. You see them zooming. And it's this element that first indicated to me the whole idea of the mind open space. And the fact that we are in the mind allowed me to think about this in terms of the rectangle image of a child playing, which was the primary theme of the previous Adventure School volume. Foolishness and getting stupid. Becoming as a child again who doesn't know anything at all about anything and is just doing what one does to celebrate what you are in those mind open spaces. Now, the parable shape I encountered when thinking about this, the next immediate thing that I ran across was a guy named Jabba the Hutt 2, with only one T in it, not two T's like in Star Wars. The second Hutt, as in structure, named Jabba. He is represented by a pug dog, even though he doesn't have a pug dog. When you come to his show, he says, "Welcome to Jabba Land, where all your Jabbas are Jabbas. How can I take your Jabba?" And I encountered him speedrunning Stanley Parable, doing zooming through the mind open space that this game is. Now, I want to relate this to Doom speedrunning and Doom Out of Bounds for a very specific reason, which is in Doom, you could turn off clipping with a command called ID clip. It allows you to walk through the walls of the stage and literally view the level from a kind of a scaffolding perspective, from the view outside of it, where normally you wouldn't see that during the path of exploring the level along its intended progression, the inside the boundaries path. In the game Stanley Parable, the game itself presents you with both obvious and subtle / bug, kind of bordering on glitchy, boundary escapes that you can do, where you can fall out of the main path or exit it on purpose in a way. If you hesitate at the wrong spot, the door converts into a blank black barrier. If you get a specific version of the two-door room hall, that happens. These experiences affected me at a level that I couldn't convey at the time. Similar to my experience in Flower and Journey, the information was within me, but I didn't yet have a tool to scan it with. That tool is the Zen paradox. It's allowing me to scan all of this information from my mysticism experiences and create school content about it. And that's what Adventure School is. It is a decoding of my mystical experience into the story of me as a person walking up to the edge of my mystical experience and paradoxically flipping through that moment into this perpetual, eternal totality made of all the moments, no matter where they occurred in the timeline. This is the final page, and they're all first pages along the way. No one of them has a significant chronological purpose that you can go in any order. You can look at all the pages, and you don't need to start at the beginning in order to convey what's being conveyed here. So I progressed from Stanley Parable speedrunning to information on Doom speedrunning, re-experienced some Doom gameplay myself, created some content on it. The thing about Doom is its default intended gameplay mechanic is the zooming, to run about the whole map at a really high speed and negotiate with the monsters, the enemies in the world as you do so. And for the most part, that pace is maintained because you negotiate with the monsters as you zoom in such a way that you gain knowledge of the map. You do what I consider to be the primary mechanism of adventure, is in terms of cognitive, in terms of Minecraft. With Minecraft, you become more and more and more familiar with the space, with the area, what the boundaries are, where you can go. You gain a familiarity. You become somebody who belongs there, in essence. And the familiarity is what conveys the feeling. The first feeling in mind open space, the contemplation, the standing still kind of a thing, the immersion in this room right here. Life, without having experienced this room, was now too horrible even to consider. That's a cut. Probably going to cut footage and narrator audio from the employee lounge in Stanley Parable. Now, the other thing about this first Minecraft element, mind open space thing, is that the opposite of it is the escape the boundaries eternal feeling. It's the sudden flip from I'm completely familiar, I completely belong here, to, oh, whoops, I'm outside this thing. I don't understand anything at all. This is spooky, or it's like a nostalgia spook feeling. And Stanley Parable hits you over the head with this feeling in multiple places. It struck me in such a way I couldn't really even, like I said, put it into words at all originally. I only understood that I felt the feeling. I didn't have any words whatsoever to put it across. And so Adventure School didn't come forth for quite a long time. I spent much of my life and my friendships trying to show this game to people, and I didn't understand how to do that until looking into the Zen paradox and creating Adventure School. So there's the feeling of belonging, of oneness, of familiarity, of knowing where you are, and it being safe and comfortable, and you being an inhabitant of it, somebody who belongs there, somebody who's not the monster, somebody who is eliminating the monsters and is mastering the area, finding its treasures. The original Battle Shout imagery. And I encountered a concept called liminal space, which essentially is a name for what's happening here when you're suddenly confronted with the space in a way that doesn't make sense, where the normality is removed, where you're suddenly out of bounds, the life in the center that's supposed to be happening there is suddenly gone. And liminal space describes something the Zen paradox exudes. It's like pausing it and seeing the whole interpolation of the whole thing, and seeing reality in a way where reality's not really like that. It's actually moving, and it's now, and it's unspeakable. But you're spooked. And there's two flavors. There's the spooky one that's scary, and there's the eternal, bright, incomprehensible one that is more like affection, more like eternal goodness. And in order to understand either one of them, you have to have both. One's the figure and one's the background, and vice versa. They flip back and forth perpetually forever. That's the meaning of the Zen paradox. The fact that all these things are mutual arising. So speed running and speed mastery of any adventure space, any mind open space, comes from the fact that there's something to master. There's a way to do it, which is verifiably and establishable as the fastest way to possibly do it, the most repeatable, I would say, the most correct, repeatable discipline or player action set that can be applied to it. This is the meaning of playing the game. If you're just going to wander slowly and just shoot the enemies when you shoot them, okay, fine. But then, what happens when you get a little more familiar? You start shooting the enemies the same way each time you go through. Now, there is an element of randomization. Sometimes an enemy appears in your way, blocking your path, and other times you're free to run straight through, and he never blocks you. The imps are notorious for this in Doom. They're an enemy who melees you and will throw fireballs at you otherwise if you're not close enough for that. They're notorious for this because you can pretty much just ignore them except when they step in your way, and you have to shoot them. Or sometimes just restart the run, because the whole point of the speed running is to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until you have obtained the play through, the walkthrough, which definitively beats the previous time. The game doesn't keep a record of this for you. That's the whole thing of it. The whole thing of it that established it as a mystical XP, as mind open space, is the fact that we're making this game up in order just to do it, just for itself, in order to celebrate being in that space. It's a form of celebrating it, contrasted by standing still and contemplating in slowness. On the opposite end, it's the Zoom celebration. So Doom speedrunning came along equally in the same power as the out-of-bounds feelings from Stanley Parable, and the whole concept kind of converged into a final structure that is completely revealed to me through looking into the Zen paradox. Completely. It contains the essences of speedrunning, of contemplation, stillness, of gaining familiarity with space, and exploring a enemy or hostile territory whilst converting it and gaining the treasure, which is you, which is yourself. That's the finding of you, of your identity when you do that. The original Battle Shout image was this, of taking on the challenges and bosses and things that vex you. So all of this wraps up into the Sly Man. The Sly Man mythos is, I think, the Zen paradox component that contains the entirety of the question path taken by somebody who's pondering the challenges of life, the how to defeat the devil, how to beat the boss, basically. So the Sly Man, essentially, he finds the key that opens the secret area. He finds the way to get out of bounds accidentally, because actually this key or this method can't be possessed, it can't be gotten, it can't be found. But somehow he has done it. He has left without making any announcement that he's going to do so. He has access to the total essence of a voluntary move without the decision beforehand to do the action. And that's the other thing about the speed zoom celebration that is indicative of the Sly Man. It's the muscle memory, the physical action of going through the space and performing the action of releasing the bowstring without first having decided to do so. To do so as a complete spontaneity exertion, where you are one with the course. You are completely with it. You are executing the moves which result in the fastest known, the most completely optimal zoom through the space that exists. The big, fast overview, which in itself is a form of having escaped the boundary. Rather than walking slowly and jumping over each enemy, as the individual granular particles of the courses would ask you to do, you have worked out an escape to that boundary of subverting. These are called skips, when you subvert one of the things that slows you down and proceed through in a way that is literally a boundary escape. It's a leap, like the Mystic's leap from the center to the top. And interestingly, I transitioned into Doom Eternal speedrunning. Now, I had some criticism for Doom Eternal gameplay, encountering it, because it fails to give you gameplay in the same spirit of the Doom classic games, which, I mean, you gotta expect that out of reboot games. They don't often, or really ever, except for in the case of Mario Maker, really provide you with something capable of the original aesthetic, the classic aesthetic. But the primary thing it fails to do is to let you zoom about. And so the great thing about the Doom's Eternal speedrunners is that they subverted the intention of the Doom Eternal developers and continued, in essence, to do the zooming that was kind of like the default gameplay path, what they meant for you to do in the classic Dooms, except in a way that was really hilarious. Jumping out of the level, clipping through parts of the level, awesome, incredible, heroic, mythical skips through the game of Doom Eternal, which is like a 15-hour gameplay path, is how they built it. But these speedruns were like 20-minute, 15-minute speedruns. And I've been watching this guy, Looper, speedrun Doom 2, going for an 18-minute goal, the definitive classic Doom. And both of these situations are characterized by total mastery, by something that comes across as absolutely Zen master, Zen zooming. Where they can't decide, they can't think about it, they can't deliberate. There's no room for deliberation. You must release the bowstring without first thinking about and deciding to do so. It has to be, you have to act to decide all at once. The essence of the Slime Man is expressed by the boundary escape of these clever speedrunning Zen practice of zooming through the spaces. And so I immersed myself in more Alan Watts study and some more advanced organization of the full lectures, like the biggest zoomed out view of the total Alan Watts material I've been studying up till now, through the frame of understanding escaping the boundaries and the Slime Man mythos. And so the whole thing has come together into this image of the Matrix escaper, this crazy Slime Man guy who's like an ant adventuring on the ceiling of a castle now. He just couldn't be held by the standard boundary of society and existence. All of this is what I hope to convey in Adventure School Session 5, which I'm sure at one point I had some kind of like super concise title about it, but maybe not. Maybe I haven't actually fully titled it yet, but the statement that keeps coming back is the thing about the edge of where you're conscious. And I feel like I've explored that to a high degree in the total picture, all the figure and all the background about game space contemplation, game space mastery, and gameplay Zen, as compared in the vehicles of Zazen and other types of Zen, like walking Zen. In the talk world is just so, in the middle of it, you get kind of a history, you get kind of a overview description of the origins of the different schools of Zen and the different ways of thinking about what Zen is and what it's for and what it means to do direct pointing to human mind without being bounded by words and assertions. The most critical thought about that is wrapped up in two different things. The realization that you can be practicing the meaning of the awakened, sitting, meditating Buddha nature while still walking away and performing any action or any activity. You contain that within you, and that's because we are in the mind. That's there in you. That's the whole essence of Buddhahood, is that you didn't do something to make it happen. You just are that. And I first experienced this insight in the form of Stanley's office, the start room. The place where you are when you press escape and you choose begin the game again. Or sometimes the game puts you back there. Sometimes that's just how the trip of life goes, and you just get back there without selecting it on purpose, but the path you walked caused it. And there are cases in Stanley Parable where you are out of bounds, you are in a halt state. Some that were built by the developer, and they tell you outright the only thing that you could do is press escape and quit the game, begin again. And in other places they say nothing. The narrator is absent. You've fully escaped the boundaries into the scaffolding of a part that they hadn't programmed for, being out of bounds with no reaction. My favorite ending, I would say, in that regard is the what I call the actual Sly Man Stanley ending, where you escape the boss's office suddenly without without warning, you back away, and the narrator is Ahmed, and he doesn't realize you're gone. He's still in the boss's office. You go back down to the beginning, and there's a new door next to Stanley's door, which leads you to the escape. And all of it is metaphorical of the sudden escape, the Slime Man Stanley. That information from when I experienced that was coded in me, but I scanned it and understood it with the Zen paradox that I contain this Stanley's office, this Microsoft Bliss wallpaper. I first called it a float place in my mind operating system. That's there, that before I was understanding I'm going up to the edge of where you're conscious. That's what I was thinking about it, is the float OS, the accessing that floating thing, and that meant to be out of the boundary in this peaceful scaffolding-like place where it's eternal and where you're no longer bounded by what's intended or what's supposed to be happening. And I tied that all back together with the Slime Man, with no matter what challenge or difficulty or pain or suffering is taking place or struggle is occurring, I contain this sanctuary office inside of me. And while my life goes much, much, much better when I literally have a solitude workspace to go into, where there is no boss and there's no person whatsoever capable of evaluating or exerting force upon what I'm doing, where I can just be me. That was my understanding of what I was looking for when I said I was trapped in corporate hell and I wanted to do something teaching like with my life and share my human survival by art aesthetic. That's the only words I had for it at the time. That morphed into the understanding of the Stanley's office place inside of me, representing the sanctuary, the total sovereignty, the Buddha-ness, the awakenedness, was my office and Stanley's office. And I am Stanley. I've always thought of me as Stanley ever since experiencing that. But the Zen paradox reconciled that into the reality, Buddha nature, imagery. The Zen paradox allowed me to see into that and see this nature of me, this whole eternally vibrating self. The motion paused, interpolated into this sense of full unity, this eternal sensation. And that image reconciled further into the whole idea of identifying when you run into that stop point, when you see you are in the depth of a despair, of a block, you're getting stuck, you're getting caught on something, you've fallen off the walkway in the Stanley's monitors room. The only thing to do is press escape, restart the game, and begin again. And you can do that. With the Zen paradox, you can see and understand that you contain that restart place, and all you have to do is see that. By seeing that that's what's happening, you are executing, you are escaping the boundary, you are doing the press escape and start back again, so that you are no longer stuck in that hang-up place where you're getting caught. And that is the whole essence of flowing on, of living without hang-ups, and of practicing the Zen, the Buddha nature goal or aspiration that paradoxically exists, although you cannot improve yourself, and you will always still continue to have those lapses, that blank spot, that get stuck. You can never, ever, ever get rid of the lapse, the sudden gap, the loss of your lucidity. And so the goal is not to drag your person role, spotlight consciousness, ego into the dream space when that happens. The goal is to remember, to go back into the starting office, the Microsoft Bliss place, the blank space that is liminal space in essence, out of the bounds, and start again. And understand that that is there, that you are eternal, you're not stuck. There's no one trapped, because it takes somebody trapped to make a trap. Those are the final words in the Slime Man segment of the Joker. And it, I think, is the ultimate Zen paradox information that I've scanned out of my adventure mythos. That mythos is rectangles up at the top level of where we're conscious, and are a view of the motion going so fast in the exact right rate that it's interpolated into a still thing, into one picture. And it's this rectangle with all 10 directions where you can suddenly see the sense of it, the unity of separateness.
It's unofficial because I have not uploaded it anywhere yet, and I want to.
And nobody really can figure out what it is. Because if Russia is a communist country, all it is a one great big corporate business. It's one corporation instead of a cluster of corporations. And it works rather miserably. And I wouldn't think if you need to fight it, it'd just fall apart because it's so boring. Of course, things in Russia, if you go back to the whole history of the thing, they were a lot worse when the brutal barons governed the country. And they are, sort of better in a measly way, like in China. Things are pretty terrible ever since the British and their friends made a mess of China many years ago. And China's been an awful place. And things, again, in China are kind of dowdy and uniform and dull. But it's, so far as basic subsistence is concerned, it's probably better than it was. But my point is that we are fighting abstractions. For abstractions. Recently, the Congress of the United States passed an act against burning the American flag. Stiff penalties for burning the flag. And those same people who passed that act with a great flurry of patriotic speeches were actively burning up the country for which the flag stands. They are allowing every kind of scoundrelly use of the water, the air, the natural resources, and exploitation of the people until the whole thing is being converted into a smog bowl. I flew not a few days ago from New York right across the country to Los Angeles, and from New York to Denver. There was smog over the whole country, as far as I could see, from 30,000 feet. And this is America the Beautiful. You burn up the flag is terrible. Burn up the country is quite okay. Because these people are confused, completely confused, between the symbolic world and the real world. And so this historical thing, you see, which is a destiny in the future, always being pursued, is completely destructive. Because technology, clocks, instruments, measurements are fine for people who know how to use them, people who know what they want. But for people who don't know what they want, and who think that the clock is the thing, that's what you need. I mean, the Russians are insane about this. The moment they move into a place with their army that has some kind of technical civilization, they capture all the wristwatches in sight, and they cover themselves with wristwatches like bracelets. Because they're time crazy too.
I'm using Windows 10.
But those things are very wonderful for people who, as I say, know how to use them. Because you can make significant plans for the future. If, and only if, you are alive today and now, and know how to live now, and know what to do with now. But if you don't, You see, you never will. Because the only time to start living is immediately. Do it. I mean, why wait around for something to happen? Let's live it up now. Let's have a ball, you see? But we don't. Because we think that if we have it now,
from Windows 7 because
something, we won't have it tomorrow.
And that's how.
But if you're always saving up to have it tomorrow, you never have it at all. Well, let's take an intermission. I was discussing this morning
that's how it's forced to switch.
The way in which time, which is a measure of motion, involves us in certain illusions.
To do something else.